Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Shodanandana Rajadana Dandana Yavanatira Panachari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridharadhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Sodanandana Vrajajana Jandana Yamaratira Vanachari Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari So, Srimad Bhagavatam, translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, this verse today is very important because it explains the statement Prabhupada makes in a purport that the conclusion is that no one falls in Vaikuntha, which has been often misunderstood because people do not take the trouble to see what the context is, what's actually being talked about here. So this question by Yudhisthira explains what Prabhupada is talking about. So, Sri Yudhisthira Uvacha. By the way, Yudhisthira, Yudhi means in battle. It's one of the sort of less common Sanskrit compounds where the word to the left is actually declined. So Yudhi means in battle. And Sthira means steady, like steady in battle. Yudhisthira. So Kidrasha Kasya Vashapo Haridasa Vimarshana Ashadheya Iva Bhati Kaderi Kantinang Bhava. So I'll briefly explain what these words mean, then we'll keep chanting. So Kidrasha, as I explained, question words in Sanskrit like who, what, where, why, begin with a K. So Kidrisha, drish is the root like for darshan. So Kidrisha, like a what look, in other words, what kind of, like what does it look like? So Kidrisha. And then the answer could be Sadrisha, of that look or that kind, or and so on. So so he's saying Kidrisha Shapa, what kind of curse? Shapa is a curse. So what kind of curse? Va, and Of whom? So who could give a curse, and what kind of curse would it be? Haridasa Abhimarshana. Abhimarshana means like overcoming, or the curse which is aimed at, which is attacking. Haridasa, a servant of Hari. So, and then he says, this is very interesting. Ashraddheya eva avati. Avati means it looks like, or that's how you say in Sanskrit, it seems like. So this seems to be unbelievable because Shraddha means faith, and Shraddheya means to be believed, something which is to be believed. And he says this is Ashraddheya, literally unbelievable. This is literally, he says, Eva, this seems to me, so Eva Avati, this seems to me to be unbelievable that Harer Ekanti Nam Bhavaha, that there could be Bhava, there could be material existence for someone who is Hari Ekanti, which means a pure devotee of Hari. Because Eka in Ekantinam, Eka means one, Anta means end or goal. So ekanta means having only one goal, having only one purpose. And of course, the I, ekanti, means the person who has only one purpose. So Hari ekantinam, Harir means pure devotees of Hari. They have no other desire, no other goal except to serve the Lord. So that these people who are pure devotees of Hari could be brought into material life, bhava. Yudhishthira says, this is unbelievable. And it turns out to be not true. Because it turns out to be, and there's Yudhishthira's right, because actually it's Jai and Vijay, who are, as stated very clearly here, in the very beginning of this discussion, pure devotees of Krishna. So this is not someone that someone's in Vaikuntha and thinks, I've always been curious about the material world. Maybe I'll just take a little, very short vacation there. So that's not the topic. Topic is not how does the soul fall. How could a pure devotee be cursed to leave the spiritual world when it is a pure devotee, it doesn't want material life and wants to serve Krishna. It's in that context that Prabhupada said, no one falls from Vaikuntha in that way. In other words, it's not that you go to all this trouble, get back to Vaikuntha, and then someone just comes along and throws you out, even though you're a pure devotee trying to serve Krishna. That's what Yudhishthira says is unbelievable. And that's what Prabhupada says never happens.
I want to hear more.
What's that?
I want to hear more.
Okay. So now that you know what it means, we'll chant it together. Sri Yudhishthira Uvacha Kidrasha Kasyava Shapo Haridasa Vimarshanaha Ashraddheya Iva Bhati Hare Kantinam Bhavaha Sri Yudhishthira Uvacha Kidrasha Kasyava Shapo Haridasa Vimarshana Ashraddheya Iva Bhati Hare Kantinam Bhava. So take it away.
Sri Yudhishthira Uvacha Idrisha Kashyava Shapo Haridasha Vimarshana Ashraddheya Ivavati
Asradeya
Harer Ekantinam Bhava
Yudhishthira Uvacha Idrisha Kasyava Shapo Haridasa Vimarshanaha Ashradheya Ivavati Harer Ikantinam Bhava
Yudhishthira Uvacha
Yudhishthira
Idrisha Kasyava Shapo
Kitsa Kashiva Shapo
Haridasa Vimarshanaha
Haridasa Vimarshanaha
Ashradeya Ivavati
Ashradeya Ivavati
Kantinam Bhavaha
Harer Ekantinam Bhava.
So, Prabhupada's translation. Maharaj Yudhisthira inquired, what kind of great curse could affect even liberated Vishnu Bhaktas? And what sort of person could curse even the Lord's associates? For unflinching devotees of the Lord to fall again to this material world is impossible. I cannot believe this. So it's literally unbelievable. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita 8:16, the Lord clearly states, Mamopetya tu konteya punarjanma navidyate. One who is purified of material contamination and returns home back to Godhead does not return to this material world. So it says Mamopetya, which means reaching me to, however, konteya, punarjanma, again, birth, navidyate, doesn't take place. Elsewhere in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Janma karma cha me divyam, evam yo vedi tattvataha, tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti, mamiti. So Arjuna, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, or Arjuna. Maharaj Yudhishthira, therefore, was surprised that a pure devotee could return to this material world. This is certainly a very important question. So, any questions so far? It's really pretty simple. As I say, it's not Vimana Vidya. Sanskrit means rocket science.
Well, for us, it is. For the conditioned souls, it is. For the rocket science.
So, Sri Yudhishthira Uvacha, Kidrisha, what kind, Kasyava, and of whom? A curse. Kasyava Shapo, a curse which, as Prabhupada translates it, overcomes Haridasa, servant of Hari.
But they're,
Hmm?
but they're already servants of Hari. They're already pure devotees.
Yes, that's the point. And therefore, it's like, for example, let's say you go to the theater, and you have a ticket, so that's your seat. And then someone who has nothing to do with the theater comes and says, you can't sit there. Well, actually, you can sit there. Or you have to leave the theater. So, you bought a ticket, you're not causing trouble. So someone can't just walk in off the street and make you leave the theater. So if you are in the spiritual world serving Hari, purely ekantinam, someone from outside just can't come in and throw you out. That's the point. That's the topic here. Yeah.
But if the four Kumars, is this just a pastime? Because I mean,
Yes, of course.
they're pure devotees too, right?
I know. Yeah. So the fact that they sort of, had anger management issues. It's
But how could they have anger management issues?
because Krishna wanted to arrange this.
Okay.
I mean, it's theater. If you're in a play and it says you become very angry and say, "Get out of here," then if you're in the play, then you're an actor. That's what you do. The director may say, "No, come on, I want a little more anger, I want a little more rage there."
But in the same way, can we say if you go back to spiritual world, a play can happen again and you
No,
for that reason. I mean, not necessarily for like you did
No,
something
but
wrong,
it's not-
if it's
no, but-
another play.
but it's not a fall down.
Oh,
If Krishna says you're a pure devotee, we're gonna do a play over there on that planet, and this is your part. That's not a fall down.
Okay.
And therefore, these souls, Jai and Vijay, played Gold Cushion and Gold Eye. Obviously, the Karmi stole it and made Goldfinger. So it's a play. So that means Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, they're actually pure devotees playing this part. It's like a Sunday feast play. Only, actually it's believable. So then of course the question would be, well, does Hiranyakashipu know he's really a pure devotee? Maybe not, but even if he's not aware, he's not actually experiencing material life, even doing these horrible things like taking over the universe and raging, storming. He's in a different state of consciousness. It's not because someone who's actually in the material world because they wanted to be there and they've committed sinful activities and therefore take birth as a demon or something. As Krishna explains in chapter 16 of the Gita, that person's really in material consciousness and suffering. Krishna says, "Aneka chitta vibranta," they're disturbed by sort of innumerable anxieties. And Krishna says, not thinking the verse, I'm sorry, it's the verse, chinta aparimeya, which means literally innumerable anxieties. So someone who actually has chosen to try to exploit the world in a demonic way, that's one state of consciousness. Someone that Krishna just needs someone. I need someone to play the demon. It's like you're in a temple on Sunday. Okay, I need someone to play the demon. So Krishna is putting together this, what Prabhupada called traveling roadshow. And so he puts together a cast of thousands. And so that's not the same consciousness if you're a pure devotee and Krishna is just engaging you to play this part. Because for one thing, non-devotees can't really see Krishna. To fight with Krishna, it's like imagine some very rich, important person, famous person who has a gym in their house. And so they, hire someone to come in and sort of, sparring partner. So it's Krishna's just arranging, because if someone's not a pure devotee, how can they actually touch Krishna or actually be with Krishna and engage with Krishna? So when Krishna comes to this world, he engages his own pure devotees in the caste.
and with Kamsa.
Kamsa? Interesting. Kamsa is not Jai or Vijay, but he did fight with Krishna. So you'd expect that, yeah. Because he was always thinking of Krishna. Because the reason he was always thinking of Krishna is that when Krishna was born, that's right, before Krishna was born, Krishna was the 8th son of Devaki. The 7th son was Balaram. But then he was transferred to the womb of Rohini in Vrindavan. And Yoga Maya herself took birth. And then Kamsa grabbed her. Imagine it. I mean, Kamsa, he grabbed her, this is just literally a newborn infant by her little feet, and he's going to like smash her against a stone floor. There was no carpeting in Kamsa's prison. So he's going to smash her against the floor, and she slips out of his hands and goes up in the sky and manifests all these weapons. So he definitely had a whoops moment. And that's when Yogamaya says, "You fool, Manda, the person who will kill you has already taken birth in this world. You're too late." And so, so Kamsa, therefore, he was always thinking of Krishna. When is Krishna going to come and kill me?
For that reason, he became a pure devotee.
No, no, that's not what we're discussing. I mean, that's one thing that he's always thinking of Krishna. So that was very purifying, as these verses are talking about. But also, when he was fighting with Krishna, I mean, he saw Krishna, he was fighting with Krishna. So how do you get to directly take part in Krishna Leela? So that's, and it's not the first time. The reason he was so angry at Krishna is because in his past life, he was Kalanemi, which is interesting. It's sort of like the cutting edge of the wheel of time. That's actually what it means. Nami. So like the edge of a wheel. He's Kala. So it's a heavy name, isn't it? Kala Nami. It's like the wheel of time is rolling, cutting everything down, and he's the edge of that wheel. So he fought Krishna, and Krishna killed him on the heavenly planets. And he somehow remembered that Krishna killed him in his past life, and he came to Earth, and he's just, I mean, what does he think was going to happen? He's committing all these atrocities and everything. He's the one that ordered that all the male babies born in the last 10 days be killed. So it's interesting because I don't know if it's directly an influence from the Bhagavatam, but in the New Testament, when Jesus was born, and there's a prophecy, so King Herod is afraid, so has all the newborn sons killed. It's in the New Testament.
But so finish this point. You were saying that only a pure devotee can touch Krishna, otherwise we'll not be able to be there.
Well, I don't
Now we have an
know.
example.
Yeah,
That's not
well,
the
I
case.
don't know. We'd have to see if the Bhagavatam actually talks about this. But it is an extraordinary thing to see Krishna. Of course, are they seeing Krishna? Because if they're covered by Maya, then they think Krishna is an ordinary person. Otherwise, they wouldn't step on the battlefield with him. If you really thought this is God, you probably would stay home, not show up for the fight. So the fact that Kamsa, it's kind of this pathetic scene where Krishna's finally had enough, and it's interesting. Kamsa's kind of up in the press box, because they have this stadium where they're having a wrestling match, and in Kamsa there's a special, there's a royal box in the stadium, so he's up there, and it's a great scene. I mean, my God, what a movie scene! It's Krishna just sort of like races right up the stadium, like they have the steps going up, and so he just races right up to the royal box and grabs Kamsa and just and kills him. I think it said he threw him off the top of the stadium. You have to go back and see literally what it says, but it's a great scene.
Some of the demons, though, it says that they merged in the body of Krishna.
Yeah, it said that if Krishna kills you, they merge, but of course we know that Giant Vijay, they may have merged just to show sort of philosophical point, but then they unmerged and showed up again in Vaikuntha.
Then they have to born again. There are three births.
No, you don't take birth in Vaikuntha. You
No,
just-
no, no, but I'm just saying that.
Yeah, they had three births.
So I'm saying that they were killed three times. What happened if you get killed by Krishna? Automatically go back, but they have to go back. So I don't understand that.
Well, it shows that they,
It's like,
yeah, well, they weren't really merged because, I mean, they merged, but it was just sort of it was theatrical. It's like a prop. But actually, yeah, because they had to do it three times, therefore. Why, anyone here like gonna try out for that part? So we have some questions. Alone from Israel, didn't we all come from Vaikuntha in the first place? And how come we fall into the material world? Oh, it's a question we haven't heard before. Prabhupada has explained that hundreds of times, that in the spiritual world you still have free will. There's sort of an idea that there's a happiness so great that it sort of deactivates, it turns off your free will. But that's not the case. We have free will, and the idea that if we were in Vaikuntha, we would never come down. That there's a hidden assumption there. A lot of times people make arguments in which there's an unstated assumption. So the unstated assumption in this argument, which we hear all the time, is that people never act against their self-interest, which, just look through your window and you'll see it. It's obviously not true. That's mostly what people do. In fact, there are very few people that truly act in their self-interest. We're trying to spread Krishna consciousness. We're trying to find people who are willing to, in a completely consistent, rational way, act in their self-interest. And it's hard to find people who do that. So people all the time act against their self-interest. And since they do that, but could there be an interest so powerful? In other words, spiritual world, it's such a powerful self-interest that it would just sort of shut off the tendency that people have to act against their self-interest. And the answer is no. Even in the spiritual world, sometimes people get curious, but Prabhupada said that you come to this world and you may, however many lives you have down here, and then when you go back to Krishna, it just seems like a bad dream. Because the spiritual world's eternal, which means infinite time, and therefore any amount of material time is infinitesimal in the context of eternal time.
So child may be told not to touch fire, touches fire, he gets burned. So does a living entity have like some kind of realization
Yeah, of course.
that while he's in the spiritual world, can he remember that I once touched fire?
Well, whether he actually thinks about it, yeah, I remember when I was Gladys McGillicuddy and I was, no, I mean, in the spiritual world, not that you can just remember, like, don't go there. Exactly what someone remembers is not talked about, but we can assume that people they've learned their lesson. It's like the child that touched fire once and got burned. I mean, it's not that every time the child sees a fire, the child, even as a 60-year-old man, relives that experience. You just get it. You just don't do that. And you don't forget that you shouldn't do that.
I think it was, you'll remember who it was. I think it was Ray Bhaktinanda, where.
Oh,
Ray
Revatinanda,
Bhaktinanda, yeah, great.
Vishnu Jana's cousin.
Yes. So I believe that there was some devotees had heard the Prabhupada had mentioned about in the verse where once attaining this position, one never falls again, once returning to the spiritual world. And the devotees had heard the Prabhupada said, had said no, but actually one can fall. So Bhaktinanda, and I think it was him, asked Prabhupada this question. Devotees are saying that it is still possible. But it says, Prabhupada, that one never falls. And then Prabhupada leaned into it and said, never means almost never.
Yeah, it's yeah, Krishna twice says that we don't fall. I think Prabhupada's the real point he was making. 'Cause I don't think there's like statistics on that. The real point that Prabhupada was making is that you still have free will. And in my view, what Prabhupada, because Prabhupada, I mean, we all tell Prabhupada stories. I've told Prabhupada stories, for years, and then I actually found a transcript and found it wasn't exactly what I remembered.
Mm.
So I think it's better to trust actual documentation.
Can you explain?
But just so Krishna twice says you don't come back. And I think Prabhupada, what he was trying to emphasize is that the fact that you don't come back doesn't mean you don't have free will. You do have free will, but you've learned your lesson.
Can you explain the context again? You explained it in the beginning of the class, but I'd like to hear it again because it didn't fully I didn't fully comprehend it. Where Prabhupada says, actually, I think it's in the fourth canto, purport. Actually, the soul can never fall from Vaikuntha. So can you explain that? I believe you were saying it in relation to
It's in relation to Jain Vijay,
Jai.
because it's a purport in the Jain Vijay story, which I think occurs twice in the Bhagavatam, mentioned twice. And the context of this story, can someone be driven out of Vaikuntha, even though that soul is a pure devotee? Can a pure devotee, that's the context, can a pure devotee be made to leave Vaikuntha by someone else? And that's what's not possible.
So my question in that regard is, and who am I to second guess Srila Prabhupada, who is anyone to? I'm just wondering why, in your estimation, Prabhupada didn't make that more clear, because it's been like, that's the question for the ages in the Vaishnava community.
Maybe he expected people to actually read his books. And that's which means the verses. That's the danger of anyone who knows very much about Prabhupada knows that his teachings are not systematic in the sense that, okay, now in this chapter, I'm going to say everything there is to say about the soul in the spiritual world. And now I'm going to, so if you just take one statement of Prabhupada in isolation, there's a danger you're going to misunderstand, especially if it's something which seems paradoxical, like, because Prabhupada said hundreds of times, back to home, back to Godhead. That was the motto. That was the whole theme of his mission, back to Godhead. And so if in one paragraph he says something which on the surface is different, an intelligent reader, as opposed to someone just sort of scanning the text to find something that sounds good for their argument, but someone who actually is trying to understand Prabhupada's teachings would see that Prabhupada constantly taught that we go back to home, back to Godhead. We are all originally Krishna conscious entities. And so there's two possibilities. Either Prabhupada just contradicted himself and didn't remember on Friday what he said on Wednesday, which I think is not a very flattering picture of Prabhupada. Or if he says something which appears to contradict what he said 100 times, maybe we should look more closely at what the context is. So there are, people who just are trying to make arguments. They just look for a quote without looking at Prabhupada's entire teaching, because that's just not what he did.
Yeah, it's such an excellent point you're making, because as you say, you can like myopically look at this one thing without understanding the greater scope of everything that Prabhupada said. And like you said, again, it's a really salient point that he spoke in such a way he didn't lay it all out. He's like, I've said it so many places in my books and my lectures, whatnot, that you figure it out. It's like you study this philosophy and then you'll understand.
Yeah, like for example, you can find a Prabhupada quote where he talks about women just sort of having simple lives, domestic chores. And you can find statements from Prabhupada saying women should get PhDs and teach in universities. And so rather than try to say, okay, here's these Prabhupada statements are true because they agree with my own ideas. And then all these other Prabhupada statements are false because they don't agree with my ideas. So when Prabhupada says women can be gurus, it's just a false statement. And so that approach where you feel that you have the authority to cancel out all these statements from Prabhupada on many subjects, that whenever Prabhupada makes paradoxical statements, you take the one you like and throw out the one you don't like without explaining why Prabhupada made those statements, is obviously not a very intelligent way to approach Prabhupada's teachings. Like I was making the point, actually in Lachua, class I gave there, around 18, that Prabhupada is actually a very sophisticated thinker. And he brings up all kinds of advanced theology. That's why I made the point that the goal is not simply to sell books. Selling Prabhupada's books is not the final goal. Final goal is to get people to read Prabhupada's books. And so therefore, if we sell lots of books and, a lot of people throw them away, as happens with some distributors who are sort of high pressure booksellers tend, a lot of the people that buy the books tend to throw them away. We know that. So they get the big numbers, but also a lot of books are thrown out. And so I think ISKCON has to see that the ultimate goal is to get people to read Prabhupada's books. And so and then the question is, what's the most effective way to get people to read Prabhupada's books? And that's, a discussion we can have. So, but again, simply looking through Prabhupada's books and accepting the statements that match your opinion and just rejecting all of Prabhupada's statements that contradict your view, well, why are you quoting Prabhupada at all? It's interesting. There's something really cynical about this, if you think of it, in the sense that, let's say a lawyer who actually has no interest in justice, the lawyer has an interest in winning the case. As we know, there are many lawyers. I don't want to say most lawyers, but I can't say it's not most lawyers. I just don't know. I've never done a study. But we know there's a very large number of lawyers who are not actually seeking justice. They want to win the case. And if they can suppress some points, evidence, and get away with it, they will do that. And so if you approach, so what you do is you have people who very passionately believe, for just to give an example, that women should be suppressed. And therefore they'll take a few statements out of context and ignore the other statement. So it turns out that they're just trying to win the case. It's not an impartial, detached effort to understand Prabhupada. So that if Prabhupada, and so we can't trust those people because their goal is to use Prabhupada, to exploit Prabhupada, to push their own agenda, which for some reason, and I don't want to psychoanalyze them, however tempting it may be, for some reason feel that their mission in life is to suppress women. So if we approach Prabhupada's books, because we're trying to win an argument, as opposed to being an open-minded scholar who's just trying to understand Prabhupada, then if we do that, then we're forced to just ignore a lot of things Prabhupada said. But if you can ignore these statements by Prabhupada, why not ignore those statements? And if Prabhupada contradicts himself, then why quote Prabhupada at all? So therefore, this topic, which to many devotees seems very simple and obvious, like we follow Prabhupada, actually requires some intelligence. It actually requires some intelligence. One has to, some things are obvious, like, did Prabhupada say we are the body or we're not the body? You don't have to be a scholar to know what Prabhupada said about that. Is Krishna God or is Godzilla God? It's like, you don't have to be a scholar to figure that one out. So most of what Prabhupada taught is obvious because it's not controversial, it's not paradoxical. He just taught that. However, there are teachings which are in which there are paradoxes. Prabhupada appears to be saying this and says that. And so when it comes to issues like that, it helps a lot if you have some scholarly training. And someone says, well, we don't need mundane scholarship. Really? Well, then why did Rupa and Sanatana send their nephew Jiva to college to get academic training, which they did? Jiva Goswami, who everyone says, as Prabhupada said, the great theologian, and yet his nephews, Rupa and Sanatana, told him, kid, you need to go to college first and then come back, which he did. He went to Benares, which was probably the most distinguished university then. He studied there. We know from the teachings of Rupa Goswami, and even mundane scholars, they all know this, although many devotees don't, but that Rupa Goswami was extremely or very, very highly educated. And an example of that education is the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion. Because his analysis of rasas, 5 primary rasas and 7 secondary rasas, he didn't make that up. That was already being taught among Hindu scholars. That was actually when Rupa Goswami wrote the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that rasa vichar, rasa analysis, was already hundreds of years old. And what he did is he very brilliantly Krishnized it, as Prabhupada would say. And the Hari Bhakti Vilas by Sanatana Goswami shows that he was a great scholar, because Hindu society was very ritualistic. They had all kinds of rules. So it was a Vaishnava version of all that. And the same thing, Jiva Goswami wrote the Hari Namamrita Vyakarna, a grammar, which he just sort of Krishnized Panini, which is a very sophisticated Sanskrit grammar that you have to be really intelligent to understand. And obviously Jiva Goswami did understand it. And we could talk about previous Vaishnavas like Ramanuja, who was even far beyond the PhD level. So, we can go on and on and on talking about great devotee scholars. So, so if we're trying to read Prabhupada's books and we want to quote from Prabhupada, for example, people who think that women shouldn't be gurus quote from, I forgot the name of it. It's a very minor text. And so if you quote from that, perhaps you don't know that a text like that was not considered authoritative. by itself within the context of learned Vedic culture. So again, it's not that you have to, be a big scholar, but you do at least have to have some very basic understanding of how to read a text or how to read Prabhupada. Yes.
It's interesting that in the main quote that the anti-Vaishnavi Diksha Guru opponents use is the Dhruva Maharaj going back to Godhead
Yeah,
quote,
yeah.
and Prabhupada saying that she could not become his guru because she was a woman, but specifically or especially because she was his mother. It's interesting that in the Prabhupada's transcription of that, he emphasizes that he could not go back to God. In the dictation,
Yeah.
Prabhupada states that she could not become a spiritual master because first she was his mother, and then secondly she was a woman. So maybe perhaps you could comment on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, Prabhupada says he couldn't become a Diksha Guru. And the terms Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru are actually not basic principles of Vedic culture. In fact, the terms don't even appear in the Bhagavatam. It's not that dividing the Guru into Diksha and Shiksha is a like eternal Vedic culture. It's not. It's not mentioned in the Bhagavatam. It's not mentioned in the Vedas. It's not mentioned in the Upanishads. It's not mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. It's not mentioned in Mahabharata. It's actually a modern thing. And so if you take a term like Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, and it's only mentioned in recent literature, then the logical question would be, what's going on here? And I think there's a very obvious explanation. And that is that as far as the Diksha Guru, a term which is not used in the Bhagavatam, back in those days, in much earlier Vedic culture, the three higher castes, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, would get the sacred thread. Vedic Bar Mitzvah. They'd get the sacred thread. That's what it was, the same age. They'd get the sacred thread, and they would chant actually a one-line Gayatri mantra, which is the first line from the Rig Veda. And so later, much later in history, so how does the Bhagavatam actually use the word Diksha? The word Diksha appears in the Bhagavatam, not the word Diksha Guru. The word Diksha in Sanskrit, what it actually means, and the way it's used exclusively in the Bhagavatam, it means a purificatory process which prepares you for a Vedic sacrifice, which may take a day or two or a little longer, or it may be preparing you, for example, a woman would take Diksha, a high-class woman, if she's going to have a child, and she wants to be in a high state of consciousness. Therefore, in the Bhagavatam, I forget which canto is it? I think at DT, she does the Payovrata, like to only drink milk or to abstain. And so before participating in a sacrifice like the Rajasuya, for example, in that case, let's say Yudhishthira was going to participate in the sacrifice. And it's interesting because in these ancient Vedic sacrifices, the man who's called the Yajamana, he's like the patron of the sacrifice. So he gets gets to sit right behind home plate. The Yajamana is the patron. These are very expensive sacrifices, and you had to be very, very wealthy. Like you had to be a king just to be able to afford it, to do it. And so the patron, the person who actually financed it, because the Brahmins didn't have that, the resources, he would actually sit in at the sacrificial fire, and he could not sit there unless he sat with his wife. He was only allowed to sit at the sacrifice if his wife was next to him, which is interesting.
Mhm.
So, it's very well known, this standard understanding. So So a day or two before the sacrifice, they would. It's very interesting because I studied all this for Mahabharata. So the day before the sacrifice, or well, first of all, before the sacrifice, they would plow the field because you have to level the land before you build, and so they would plow it with a golden plow, and they would mark out the perimeter of the sacrificial arena, which is very large. It's like a stadium floor or something. And then they would, put a wall around it. And there were three fires, one fire to offer to the devas, one fire to offer for the householders, the people doing the sacrifice, because basically, 99% of the adults in the society were householders. And then one for the forefathers. So then a day or two before the sacrifice, the patron, like in the Rajasuya, Yudhishthir and his wives, they would go, they'd build this little cottage in the area, within the arena, and they would go there, they would take off all their jewels, all their fancy clothes, they would put on these simple white garments, they would eat very, very simply, and to get themselves in higher consciousness. In other words, you don't want the king sitting there at the sacrifice thinking, oh my God, I have to call back that insurance salesman or something. And so, because they had, back then, they managed, they had all kinds of, so you have to be in a higher state. So what you do is the king and queen, they go to this little cottage, they wear simple clothes, no jewels, no feasting. You have very, very simple food, and you just hang out with the priests who tell you, what you're going to do. Okay, at this point, you come and step over here, and then you say this mantra, to train them because they have to participate. So that process where you get ready for a sacred event, because when you go into the sacrifice, you're going to be especially in the presence of God. I mean, Vishnu is going to be there. Yagyo Vai Vishnu, it's in the Vedas that the sacrifice is Vishnu. So before you go into that very sacred space, you have to be in proper consciousness. So that process to get you into proper consciousness for an encounter with God, that's called Diksha. And that's the only way the word is used in the Bhagavatam, which is interesting. It's a purificatory process that prepares you to be in the right consciousness to meet God, or to be in the presence of God. So now what happened in later culture is when the great bhakti revolutions, where it's talked about actually in just normal history of India, that Krishna was forgotten for some time, and then there was this revival of bhakti yoga, and it sort of swept over India, and that's one of the main things that sort of eliminated Buddhism, is that many Buddhists became Vaishnavas. So there was this powerful bhakti movement.
When was that?
Maybe starting maybe a few thousand years ago. And that's where you get that Greek ambassador who became.
Buddha came up 2,500 years ago.
What's that?
Didn't Buddha come?
Yeah.
20, so it couldn't have been a few thousand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so right. So a few is two. So yeah, you're right. It's a good point. After Buddhism. So so then with this rise of bhakti and going back to the Bhagavad Gita and then eventually the Bhagavatam, Diksha was then sort of redefined. And this is post Bhagavatam. This is after the Bhagavatam, it's not in the Bhagavatam. Diksha was understood to be that you're preparing to meet God, but not just in a ritual, but actually in the spiritual world. You're preparing to actually go back to home, back to God. And therefore, Diksha is something you do for the rest of your life. So you're initiated and you make a vow, and and for the rest of your life, you're preparing to meet Krishna. So, so this related, but also clearly revised definition of Diksha, which is not found in the Bhagavatam or the Gita. So then, and there's another historical factor, and that is that Guru, I mean, before Bhakti swept over the land, you would have Diksha, and it was just you just needed a priest. Bless your soul.
So sorry.
So again, Diksha was very much sort of like, you know, the Vedic bar mitzvah. It's like let's say you're Jewish or let's say you're Catholic, and you have confirmation.
Yeah.
And the reason they have confirmation, by the way, is because originally in early Christianity, when you were baptized, it was very much like initiation. You had to take vows, you had to follow principles. And that's why Constantine didn't get baptized until he was on his deathbed. It's like, you know, I'm a king. I can't follow the principles. I kill people. You know, I do all kinds of things. And so originally it was a decision. You have to be old enough to make a conscious decision that I'm choosing to follow Jesus. And that was baptism. But then Augustine, among his many, I think, very unfortunate ideas, had the idea of infant baptism, which is what they do now. You know, they baptize babies.
When did that tradition start?
Goes back, I mean, probably at least Augustine. So, but the idea is,
I missed that. When did it originate?
well, Augustine was in favor of it, so it goes back.
Augustine.
So, so obviously babies are not choosing. What are the four principles? You know, it's like, you know, baby. So babies, they're not really agreeing. Like, yes, I want to be a Christian. I want to follow Jesus. So therefore, because the first baptism is not really the original idea, just to make sure that, you know, so anyway, sort of tie people in to the church. So therefore, when the child is old enough to sort of decide, then you get the confirmation. So that's where that comes from. But then going back to Diksha, so what you get in India, so you have Bhakti, and you have like this very strong sense of what a guru is. A guru is someone who actually brings you to Krishna. And so therefore, this old idea of a guru is just someone that, you know, just does this ritual thing, just teaches you, you know, gives you your sacred thread and chant one line. So therefore in India, especially before the, you know, the very modern period, every respectable family would have Diksha. Every respectable family had a family guru, and many families still do in India. And you get this ritual Diksha, which has very little to do with spirituality. In fact, it has nothing to do with spirituality, or almost nothing. And so therefore, the distinction came in. Okay, there's a Diksha guru, which could just be your family guru, but then there has to be someone who actually enlightens you about Krishna consciousness. So the Shiksha guru is actually was more important, and the qualification for a Shiksha guru was actually higher, because it was someone that actually knows what's going on. They know Krishna. And so, of course, and then when you come to Prabhupada, within ISKCON, then the Diksha guru, because practically all the disciples that Prabhupada had when he was here were coming from places outside of India, and they didn't have just a ritual family guru. And so it just emerged where and say even with Bhaktisiddhanta, where the Prabhupada initiated us, but that was the real thing. I mean, you were initiated into Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada, it's almost like it was sort of the second initiation was almost like confirmation. It's not that we got infant Diksha from Prabhupada, but still, Prabhupada recognized the need to encourage the disciples, to make them feel connected. So he gave them first initiation. But then but if you only have first initiation, in a sense, it doesn't make you a Brahmin in the formal, official sense of Indian culture. For example, with first initiation, you can't worship the deities, unless the temple's really short-handed. But anyway, so you can't worship the deities and all that other stuff. And so the fact that you're initiated, but you can't do all the official things that only a Brahmin can do, shows that the first initiation, Prabhupada says, just to encourage them. I mean, it's important, it's significant, but it does not place you within traditional Varnashram culture. It doesn't place you as a Brahmin within the society. Whereas traditionally in the Vedas, it did. Because you got one initiation and you got the Gayatri mantra. So these are all details. These are all adjustments. These are not the eternal principles. It's not an eternal principle that there is a Diksha Guru, but there's a Shiksha Guru, or that you get first initiation, but you can't worship the deities yet. These are all necessary and I think very intelligent adjustments. But therefore, to say that people are qualified to be Shiksha Gurus but not Diksha Gurus makes no sense unless someone can be a qualified Shiksha Guru, but they still, maybe, take a beer every now and then and light up a cigar, at night. So it's, in other words, if the Shiksha Guru is actually a qualified Shiksha Guru and is following the principles, that's the main guru. That's the higher qualification. And so it's interesting how some people are making arguments they don't really even understand Vaishnava history. Yes, did you have a question?
The very beginning, so.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So many questions now accumulated. Okay.
You're much more patient than me, by the way.
This idea of guru, and Shiksha Diksha, we hear Prabhupada says, maybe others, acharyas and purports also, that spiritual life begins when someone gets a formal link to the parampara, when they're initiated.
Well,
yeah, clarify
Yeah.
the formal.
I mean,
link.
before I was actually initiated, I was absolutely linked to the parampara. I was having fantastic spiritual realizations. I was getting a ton of mercy from Prabhupada. I was preaching like anything. And so to say, okay, I was getting realizations, I was advancing, I was preaching, I was persuading other people to become Vaishnavas, but I wasn't really connected to the parampara. That seems a little silly.
So how to understand this? How to understand this point?
Well, parampara, if we take it from the Gita, chapter 4, text 1 and 2, maybe 3, you're connected to the parampara when you submissively hear from the parampara. And so I'm sure we all have that experience. I mean, before you're initiated, because if you weren't having powerful realizations, why in the world did you get initiated? I mean, if you joined the Hare Krishna movement and I'm not realizing anything, I'm going home. Why in the world did you stay for initiation if you weren't getting realizations? And if you were getting realizations, where were they coming from? Because if they weren't, I mean, how could it be the case that you can get powerful, bona fide spiritual realizations that are not coming through parampara? Then where are they coming from? Because, you know, it's so we need a little philosophy. So I mean, obviously, when you start to read one of Prabhupada's books and you start to have realizations, you're obviously connected. The lights go on.
Can I say something in this regard? Sorry to interrupt, but it confirms your point. Vaikuntanath asked Prabhupada, many book distributors are asking that we're distributing so many books, but if these people never actually and never come in contact with you, or somehow they go off on their own, you know, what's going to be their fate? Are they connected? And Prabhupada said, just by reading and studying my books, I consider them initiated. That was from his anecdote.
And what about the fact that Prabhupada
So
also,
it confirms what you're saying.
Prabhupada also said that if they even just touch the book or they keep it in their house, they benefit.
Well, they benefit, but Prabhupada, in this case,
I'm not trying to negate.
No, I understand. I
in
understand.
this case, Prabhupada said, if they read my books, they're
Right.
Well, that's what happened. I started to read Prabhupada's books, and my material life just kind of vanished. So, but of course, it's not that initiation. Yeah, who needs initiation?
Right.
You know,
That would be the next follow.
Yeah, you could say, well, why be initiated? You know, I can use the money here. So it's so I think that the initiation is still significant if you are a person that keeps their word. Because making a vow, promising to do it, is significant. And even because if you look at the culture we find in the Bhagavatam and the Mahabharata, if somebody says something, that's it. You know, I gave my word. What's that expression? My word is my bond. I mean, look at Bhishma. Bhishma gave his word that he wasn't going to marry. So even to save the planet, he wasn't going to break it. That was like, and even Krishna said that's going a little far. So, but initiation it gets into the larger socio-historical issue, which is
Always does.
always does, and that is the role of ritual in human life. And what even sociologists and anthropologists, what even they understand, is that rituals can be powerful if you stay awake. You know, I mean, you know, rituals, because it's the community coming together, and let's say through music, through sacred food, through hearing, dancing. It's a way of it actually impresses, like in the sense of prints on your soul very powerfully, principles, sacred truth, obligations, duties. So, I mean, that's why, for example, when you're being, let's say, if you, let's say you're in court and you're going to testify, they could just say, don't lie. Okay, take your seat or something. Like, you won't lie, right? No, I won't lie. But, you know, you put your hand on a sacred book, or even the inauguration of the president. So rituals are a necessary means of sort of sacralizing obligations, and people keeping their promises makes society possible. Because obviously, if people felt no obligation to keep their promise or to do their duty, then you couldn't have civilization, and certainly not spiritual life. So the initiation means something. Like that's why they have graduation ceremonies. You get the funny hat.
So why do you think that in this recent decision by the GBC to perpetually put off coming to a real conclusion on the issue, when these points, the philosophical aspect of the point is so apparent to a, thinking person, an intelligent person, intelligent devotee person, that there's the institutional considerations overrode the philosophical considerations, and how is that allowed to happen by so-called Brahminical body?
Well, I wasn't consulted. Not that I'm saying the GBC can't make a decision without consulting me, but it might have been a good idea. So, Prabhupada never said the GBC can't make mistakes. I think they did make a mistake. And it doesn't mean that anarchy is a better option. It doesn't mean that, well, I'm not going to be part of this nonsense. I'm leaving ISKCON, because my point is that if the GBC is not having a great year, then it seems to me that Prabhupada needs me more. People that even consider maybe I, should leave ISKCON, I think they don't really understand Prabhupada. It's ISKCON doesn't belong to the GBC, and it doesn't belong to me or you. It's Prabhupada's movement. And of course, it is Prabhupada's movement precisely because he knows more than anyone that everything belongs to Krishna. And so it's like if someone who has saved you needs you more than ever, you just abandon them because I don't feel like it. It seems to me that to consider, well, if the GBC is going to do things like this, maybe I don't want to be in ISKCON. To me, it's betraying Prabhupada just as much as the people who are clearly betraying Prabhupada by threatening the GBC. I mean, they're clearly betraying Prabhupada. And so, and then if you walk away, are you just going to turn over Prabhupada's mission to these people? I mean, is that your idea of how to please Prabhupada? So when I see people betraying Prabhupada, as I do now, I feel that Prabhupada needs me more than ever. I mean, obviously, Prabhupada doesn't really need me. He just needs Krishna. But still, according to the pastimes of the Hare Krishna movement and Yoga Maya, Prabhupada needs us. Oh, a lot of questions. Okay.
Yeah.
These all. So didn't we all? So as a disclaimer, I agree that due to free will, one can leave the spiritual world, etc. Okay, thank you. At the same time, there are devotees who may be confused. Yeah, there may be about the topic, what to speak about Vaishnavas that are convinced otherwise. What type of mood should we have in relation to all this? Rational. So on Hari Bhuti, on this subject, I heard a theory that since Jai and Vijay were gatekeepers of Vaikuntha, they weren't actually in Vaikuntha. That's a great theory. It just contradicts the Bhagavatam, but who needs the Bhagavatam? This is said by those who support the literal interpretation that no one know. The Bhagavatam doesn't say that no one falls from Vaikuntha. That's a purport. And Prabhupada said many times that his statements are true because, and only because, they agree with Shastra. So if you take Prabhupada as saying something which contradicts Shastra, then Prabhupada would reject your interpretation of what he's saying. I wrote a paper on this, but who has time to read nowadays? I wrote a paper on this in which I quote Prabhupada extensively, saying that his words are true because he's repeating what's in Shastra, and that Shastra is the central authority. So if you think that Prabhupada is an authority independent of Shastra, you are contradicting Prabhupada. In other words, you cannot, literally, you cannot accept Prabhupada as being authoritative, independent of Shastra. You can't, because that means you're rejecting Prabhupada, because Prabhupada consistently taught that he does not have independent authority. That all of his authority is because he is faithfully and intelligently repeating Shastra. So the claim that, well, it's not in Shastra, but I accept Prabhupada because he said it, no, that means you're rejecting Prabhupada and misinterpreting what he said. So it's logically impossible to accept Prabhupada in that way because Prabhupada rejects an interpretation of his statement which contradicts Shastra. So I asked my assistant to post a better copy of our original position without the weird font issues. Thank you. And here's the link. So Niti to the rescue again. So
She was the last time.
yes,
Good print that as actually a small book.
Yeah.
I
well,
printed
we
it.
should reprint it. It wouldn't cost for anything. Yeah, we should just reprint it.
I mean, it's an important, it's a very
It is. It's got
superlative contribution on your.
yeah, I wrote about half of it, but it's got amazing quotes from other devotees also. So Suniti has just posted the link. So read our original position. It's got overwhelming evidence from all the acharyas. Overwhelming evidence, massive evidence supporting Prabhupada's teaching that we go back to home, back to Godhead. What is the philosophical motive of those who say no one can fall from Vaikuntha? What is their motive? I don't know. You should ask them what their motive is. It's certainly their motive is not to carefully study our teachings. Would you please give a direct response to the book in Vaikuntha? I did give a direct response, and I wrote half a book about it.
Who wrote the other?
I think Druta Karma posted some things, different devotee scholars. So so there's a link. So the direct response can be found. Click on the link which Suniti has given us. So does Maharaj have any classes on Rupa Goswami's work on Krishnizing of the Natya Shastra? No, I don't. Tamal Krishna actually very brilliantly, in his introduction to the Jagannath Priya Natakam, Tamal Krishna Goswami wrote a wonderful book that should be, how should I put it, more present in the life of ISKCON. Jagannath Priya Natakam. He did a great job, so you can read that. So Srila Prabhupada considered himself a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta before taking initiation. I don't know if he said he was a formal. I mean, clearly he was a follower of Bhaktisiddhanta. Clearly he had accepted Bhaktisiddhanta in his heart. Can we go back to the Mataji's question? Not today. I'm moving on another day. Understanding Prabhupada. Thank you. Suniti. God, what would I do without you? So Suniti has now posted my essay, Understanding Prabhupada, which gives a lot of evidence of, according to Prabhupada and according to Shastra, how we should understand Prabhupada's statements. When does he speak infallibly? When is he not speaking infallibly? And this is all based on Prabhupada's own teaching. So I've said this many, many times, but I'll just say it one more time here, that there are so many people who accept Prabhupada as an authority on everything except one thing. The one subject for which they don't accept Prabhupada as an authority is Prabhupada. Prabhupada is not authority about himself. So even though Prabhupada says so many times, so emphatically, that I'm speaking infallibly only when I'm quoting Shastra, they reserve the right to reject Prabhupada's explanation of Prabhupada and understand Prabhupada in a different way. So actually, it's logically impossible to accept everything Prabhupada said is true. Now, the term logically impossible means that it just involves a contradiction of language, which makes the language meaningless. Like if you say John is a happily married bachelor, that's logically impossible. If you intend the normal meaning of the words, like bachelor and married, then it's logically impossible. You don't need to say, well, I'm going to hire a private investigator and find out if John is or is not a married bachelor. You don't have to do that. The statement is meaningless because the words are contradictory. In that sense, to say that everything Prabhupada said is true is logically impossible. Because Prabhupada said that some things I say, it's just my opinion. And so if you accept Prabhupada's statement that I make mistakes on material, non-Shastra things, like if you accept everything Prabhupada said, then you can't say that everything Prabhupada said is true. And if you say everything Prabhupada said is true, you can only accept that if you think some of the things Prabhupada said are not true. So therefore, it's logically impossible to believe that everything Prabhupada said is true, or to claim that. But who needs philosophy if you have the philosophy or your version of it? It's interesting, when Prabhupada said religion without philosophy becomes sentimentalism or fanaticism, he didn't just mean religion without the philosophy, which is ours. He meant religion without philosophy, which means the ability to reason in an intelligent, rational way. Because even our philosophy, Prabhupada's teachings are full of paradoxes, apparent contradictions. You know, women should be taught simple skills. Women should get PhDs in universities and teach at the college level. I mean, you find all kinds of things. And so these are paradoxes where if you understand how to read Prabhupada's books intelligently, you begin to understand his style or his methodology, what he's doing. So just claiming everything Prabhupada said is true, that means it's true. And Prabhupada says he makes mistakes, which means everything he says is not true. So what these people are saying is everything Prabhupada said is true. Some things Prabhupada said are not true. Those things are logically impossible. In fact, it's one of the first rules of logic from Aristotle, the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be true and false at the same time in the same relevant sense. So at the same time, in the same relevant sense, you cannot say, we are in Milwaukee. We are not in Milwaukee. And the same relevant sense means some could say, well, I'm not in Milwaukee physically, but my heart is in Milwaukee. And someone from Milwaukee, I have to explain that one, but
I'm from Milwaukee.
okay, so this goes right to your heart. So you could say, well, I'm not physically in Milwaukee, but my heart is in Milwaukee, so I'm always in Milwaukee. But that's not the same relevant sense. You're making two statements not in the same sense, the same relevant sense. So in the same relevant sense, it's logically impossible to say that everything Prabhupada said is true, because he said that's not true. So it does require a little intelligence to read Prabhupada's books. And to really appreciate Prabhupada's books, it helps if you know something about philosophy. You don't need a lot of philosophy to go back to God. If you just have faith in Prabhupada, I have to surrender to Krishna, fine. But if you want to go out in the world and present Prabhupada's teachings to intelligent people, then you have to know some philosophy. Because what you get out of Prabhupada's books, to some extent, depends on what you bring to Prabhupada's books. For example, let's say you have an interest in political science. And so Prabhupada says Yudhisthira was an emperor. Well, what kind of emperor? Because if you study history, there are different definitions of what an emperor is. So what kind of emperor was Yudhisthira? Was he an absolute emperor? Was he a king? Or what was a Vedic king? Was it like in the Magna Carta, primo inter pares, the first among equals? Or was it a different kind of king? Was it, an absolute monarch? And so, but if you're not interested in political science, you will never bring those questions to the reading. You'll say, oh, Yudhisthira was the emperor. And that's basically all you want to know. Of course, if you bring some knowledge and questions, then you will go deeper and you'll find out that no, in the Vedic system, the emperor, Samraj, or the Raja, king of kings, actually, to use modern language, did not interfere in the internal affairs and management of other kingdoms unless they were doing really bad things. And so the king was something like a federal government in the sense that it made sure that state governments didn't do crazy things. To give an example, when Vichitravirya died, there was a time, he was the last son of Satyavati, and when Vichitravirya died, apparently from tuberculosis, there was no Kuru king. There was no one to inherit the throne. And Bhishma, which if you just study the Mahabharata, it's obvious that he didn't just say he wouldn't get married and have children. He also said that he would not fight unless it was at the order of a reigning Kuru monarch. And the reason we know that is because when Vichitravirya died, Bhishma stopped protecting the Kuru Empire. And it specifically said people were stealing land, there was chaos. In other words, international order broke down. So thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.